Welcome, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here for this press event, which is also being streamed and is available to be viewed by members of the public. This session invites 4 of our partners to join, each from the private sector, government, NGO, and academia, because these 4 sectors really are at the core, the 4 pillars of the work that we are trying to do with the Virtual Island Summit. Believing that any change really needs to involve these 4 sectors in some way, and we try and really approach all of them. I'll shortly be introducing our first speaker to give a short address, and then I'll introduce each of the speakers individually to share why they are involved in the Virtual Island Summit and the opportunity they see for island collaboration, and particularly in the lead up to COP26, the Global Climate Change Conference in November. But we're not just going to limit ourselves to that. After we've heard briefly from each of our delegates, I will introduce a video launching the Island Innovation Awards, and then open up to members of the press for questions. If you are a member of the press, please do edit your name, your attendee name, so we can clearly see which organization you are in. And you can either raise your hands through the app or submit a written question through the Q&A, but we'll only be calling on people that have specifically identified the press organization that they're members of. Members of the public are also welcome to submit questions, but we will prioritize press representatives first. And of course, as always, please go ahead and do introduce yourself in the chat box so we know who you are, where you're joining from, and what organization you represent. With that, I would now like to invite Ambassador Dr. Walton Webson, who is the permanent representative of Antigua and Barbuda to the United Nations, and also the chair of the Alliance of Small Island States, to deliver some remarks. Thank you, Ambassador Webson, over to you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, excellencies, colleagues, members of the press, guests, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Alliance of Small Island States, it is a pleasure to be with you. It gives me great pleasure to be with you and speak to you on this very important morning. The Alliance of Small Island States has been saying for a long time, and this has been confirmed more recently by the IPCC report, that the climate change crisis is a result of human activity. It is real. Our global goal of keeping temperatures rise to about 1.5 degrees is off track. And our islands, the small island states, are facing extremely difficult weather with very limited resources to rebuild or to fight this man-made crisis that is impact all of us with devastating levels of climate and temperature damages. Friends, greenhouse gas emissions produced by bigger countries are driving this climate disaster. Major emitters must take account for the damages inflicted by the oil and gas industry and the coal industries, knowing that every single ton of carbon and every single dollar spent on fossil fuel will have a devastating, a negative impact on all of us. We need change, and we need it now. The fossil fuel industry is paid annual subsidies of over $600 billion by the G20 countries, causing severe damage to our planet. While, colleagues, get this, the UN Climate Fund gets only $2.4 billion, $2.4 billion a year to save us. Do the math, because the math is simple. It does not add up. It just does not. This planet, this blatant inequity absolutely must stop and be addressed. And as I said previously, it must be now. We need developing countries to keep their promise, developed countries, pardon, to keep their promise to provide the $100 billion in finance with a higher goal by 2025. At this point, we have yet to achieve the target, and we absolutely must do better. This is not simply a matter of money. It is a matter of our continued existence on this planet. That's how important it is. That's how dire it is for island states. We need climate finance reform now if we are to achieve our sustainable development objectives and the goals that we have all set out to be accomplished in the next 9 years. As it stands at this time, climate finance for SIDS funds our response to the negative impacts of the emission of others. It does not fund our island development. Right now, we are just patching, as we would say in my part of the world. We are just patching things. We need funds for development. Our struggle to access climate action financing is well documented. We are stuck in a vicious climate cycle that is ill-adapted to our realities and takes away from our ability to invest in our socio-economic needs and development objectives. The special circumstances of SIDS is well known, continuously, but yet it is continuously ignored. We are forced to borrow at a commercial rate to recover from climate change impacts. We did not bring on ourselves. We grapple with high landed costs of needed technology to implement mitigation and adaptation action, and obsolete technology is dumped on SIDS, and we must change this if we are truly going to address the issues before us. We see larger countries dumping onto the SIDS their old and soon to be outdated technology. That's not going to help to transform. For us to forge ahead, we must be brought into the most modern technology that's transitioned our development. Equitable support and accessibility and accessible climate finance for SIDS is crucial at this time. AOSIS is advocating for a for the use of a multidimensional index, which must be used in assessing the needs of vulnerable island states like us. We must approach these with new thinking and involve new challenges by bringing in all agencies, IFIs, international organizations, etc. Per capita does not take our true challenges and structural realities into account. This, again, must change. SIDS are being forced to accept a fate that we had no part in manifesting. There is a status quo at play here that we will no longer accept and can no longer absorb. It is time for the developed world to rebuild the trust and that has been broken, and we, in order for us to regain our hope for development, the Paris Agreement must be met, and we must work towards that. Allow me to make two quick points before ending here. Small islands can have a fighting chance if we respond, if the developed countries will respond to the promises made that will allow us to move forward. AOSIS is determined to have our voice heard on these issues at COP26. We are determined to come away from COP26 with commitments to actual action, and no more simple promises and simply using words. We must come out with actions for implementation of the Paris Agreement. Time is no longer on our side. We cannot afford any further delays. So my colleagues and my friends and fellow proud islanders, can we achieve a future that is fair and equitable, one in which we no longer have to fear the complete eradication of our lives and livelihoods? Can we? I remain hopeful and keeping our 1.5 degrees alive to stay alive. I pledge, this pledge is imperative to all of us. At this rate, our actions are leading us further away from it, when 1.5 is already an acceptance of severe and harmful conditions. We must change. We must believe in our worth, our might as a people, and stand firm to insist on conditions that will steer us firmly on the path towards 1.5 degrees, the promise from which we left Paris. My hope is also bolstered by the action that I see and recognize within island states and amongst the leaders of these island states, who make such an impact fighting against climate change. And I am very pleased today that we can celebrate some of these achievements by individuals and organizations with the launch of the Island Innovation Award. SIDS have led the way. We have seen action in the Seychelles and action amongst many SIDS. And I hope SIDS countries are seriously considered for this award and will be able to celebrate our resilience by so doing. We are seeing the first ever climate adaptation debt reconstructuring from the Seychelles, and we must celebrate that. New approaches are being promoted and in other island states, and we need to celebrate that. Together, we will make that change, and we join you in the celebration of this new award, and we look forward to its launch. Finally, let us continue to lead the charge and be the conscience that spurs the necessary action by the whole world amongst us, leaders on the world stage, innovating, advocating, and fighting on the front line of climate change. I thank you.
Many thanks, Ambassador Webson, for joining us this morning. I know you had a very busy schedule and unfortunately won't be able to stay for questions, but we nevertheless appreciate you taking the time. I'd now like to invite a representative from the private sector who will discuss why they have been involved with the summit and why they decided to support the event. Each of our next speakers will be, 3 speakers will be here for about 5 or 6 minutes each, just to deliver some comments, and then we'll open up to the floor for questions from journalists. So please do go ahead and submit those questions. So Alexis Chalot is the Islands and Microgrids Director at EDF Renewables. And Alexis, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much, James. To explain everyone why I've chosen to participate in this conference, it is quite easy. In fact, I personally believe that investment in the energy transition should be prioritized on island. Not only because people living on island are especially worried by climate change consequences, but essentially because at least 90% of the power generated on island come from diesel engines. We all know that diesel generators are the most CO2 emitting power plants. But it is less well known that renewable energy is now a lot cheaper than diesel and as practical than diesel generators to deal with supply-demand balance on the grid. We have seen so much progress in battery technology in the last few years, and their price has dropped so fast that renewable energy has become the obvious option for island. I came here to repeat and repeat that a renewable project on island will offset diesel usage and avoid more CO2 emissions than any other renewable projects. That's the reason why this kind of project should be a priority. It was easy to convince 2 years ago EDF and EDF Renewables to launch a new team exclusively dedicated to renewable energy projects on island, as the purpose, the raison d'être in French, of EDF Group is to build a net zero energy future and support its clients in the energy transition. I'm proud to have worked in the last 16 years for a power utility generating 90% of carbon-free electricity. I have decided to be a sponsor of the Virtual Islands Summit to make known to island states that EDF Renewables is the right partner to facilitate their energy transition. First of all, EDF is already in charge of the power grid on a dozen islands with the objective to reach 100% renewable energy by 2030 on those territories. Secondly, EDF Renewables are the world-leading experience in hybrid projects, combining solar and battery systems. For example, after the recent commissioning of a 100 megawatt solar project combined with 140 megawatt hour of storage, EDF Renewables has just announced, end of last week, the signing of a 300 megawatt solar project combined with 600 megawatt hour of storage. Those 2 projects are based in the desert of California. Thirdly, EDF Renewables has been selected as preferred bidder for a tender in a large Pacific island. Our goal in this ongoing project is to offset 80% of the diesel power generation of the island state to avoid 2 million tons of CO2 emissions and reduce fossil fuel dependency of the country. Last but not least, the future power purchase agreement will lead to a cut of the national energy bill over 20%. To summarize the key messages I wanted to share with island states, I will say, firstly, the recent drop of battery and solar prices has made the alternative of renewables energy a no-brainer decision for island states. It's time to go green for the planet, but also to make substantial savings. Secondly, EDF Renewables has all the required skills and experience to facilitate your energy transition and help you to achieve your targeted energy mix at the better price. Thirdly, you won't even need to invest, as EDF Renewables will manage the project from A to Z, including the development, the financing, the construction, and the operation. We will sell you the generated power on a $1 per megawatt hour basis at a fixed price below your current energy cost. Thank you for your attention.
Many thanks, Alexei, for those comments, and hopefully you'll be able to stay for some questions in case anyone from the audience would like further to know further about that. I'd now like to invite a representative, one of our partners for previous events and this event. We're very privileged to have the Wait Institute to be a partner and a returning partner for our virtual island summit, representing the NGO sector. And I think what's particularly interesting about the Wait Institute is the global perspective that they have, but also the very localized impact and the very local focus of the individual projects. So Dr. Catherine Mengerink, the executive director of the Wait Institute, is very kindly joining us early in the morning in California, and we really appreciate that. So over to you, Catherine.
Thank you, James, and good morning for those of us just starting our day, afternoon, and good evening. Looking at the participant list, I realized that this group of people participating spans the globe, and I think that I'll just start by saying I think that's one of the really amazing things about this summit is that it is running in this amazing 24 hours a day format with people from all over the world. So my name is Catherine Mengerink. I'm the executive director of the Wait Institute, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about who we are and what we do to get us started. The Wait Institute is a US-based nonprofit organization that works with island nations to support Blue Prosperity. And when we say Blue Prosperity, what we mean by that is that it's a term that we use to describe a future that achieves healthy ocean ecosystems and prosperous economies that support the communities that depend upon them. We believe that communities and our nations do not have to choose between a healthy environment or a healthy economy, that really we should be advancing management systems that achieve both. So to achieve our goals, we work with nations to provide technical support on a few core issues related to the management of our oceans. One is marine spatial planning that can be used to both achieve economic success as well as marine protection, sustainable fisheries, and blue economy. We're currently working, as James said, we work globally, and we're supporting our Blue Prosperity programs in 8 island nations, includes work in the Caribbean Sea, in the Atlantic, the Pacific, and the Indian Ocean. And in fact, the ambassador is no longer with us, but I wanted to mention that we started our work on marine spatial planning in the island of Barbuda, which is, as many of you probably know, an island nation of only a couple thousand people. Sorry, not a nation, it's part of Antigua and Barbuda, but an island of only a couple thousand people. And we worked with the Barbuda Council, the government of Antigua and Barbuda, and the Barbuda community to achieve a marine spatial plan that protected over 30% of their nearshore waters. So in this global effort to achieve 30% marine protection by 2030, there are several island nations out in the world who have already achieved this goal and are really leading the way and showing other nations how they can achieve these objectives. So we continue to work with Barbuda today in supporting their ongoing implementation of their ocean management systems, as well as working with other countries to improve upon their existing management systems. I will say that, as many people know, that island nations, only a very small percent of the territories and assets are land-based. And for many nations, the ocean is their largest resource. However, a lot of small island nations lack capacity and the finances to effectively manage those ocean resources. And that's really where we try to provide support and a bridge to help advance the improved systems of management. I will say one note on oceans and climate. I think that given the importance of climate and the impacts that we are causing on our globe, it's important to recognize that the ocean and climate are integrally linked, and to address climate change requires effective management of the ocean and its resources. We can think about this in a few different ways. One, it requires developing ocean renewable energy and thinking about where to site that in a way that is both achieves the energy objective, but also is least impactful on the ocean resources. We have to protect our existing carbon sinks, including mangrove forests and seagrass beds that can help sequester carbon. We also have to work to ensure that our coral reefs and other habitats that are enormously impacted by climate are as resilient as possible in the face of this immense change. And we need to protect the island communities who are on the front lines of climate impacts, including from storms and sea level rise. So I hope that I've given you a brief view of who we are and what we do. And I just want to say a couple of words about this Virtual Island Summit and the importance of it. I think that what makes it special, as I said, is that it's this global summit. Because it's virtual, so many different people can participate. It's not the same 200 people that show up at conferences or even thousands, but an entire different sector can participate, and it includes people from the private sector, academia, nonprofit communities, and government, which is crucial if we're going to achieve lasting, sustainable oceans and really a sustainable planet. I will just end my comments by inviting all of you to join us later today at 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific time in the US. We'll be hosting a session called Hometown Heroes, the people making thriving blue economies a reality. At the end of the day, it is people in communities that are making a difference in whatever sector that they work in. And our organization, the Wade Institute, can provide technical and financial support, but it's really the leaders in communities and in island nations that are paving the path towards our successful environmental future. So this session will highlight some of those leaders and some of the efforts that they're undertaking to try to advance a blue economy. And with that, I will stop and turn it over to the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mengerink. And I'm sorry, I got your name wrong again, Mengerink. And we really appreciate that, very much looking forward to your session this afternoon. We've just shared some information in the chat as well, and you can find that in the agenda. So would encourage you to join that. One more speaker, Dr. Francesco Sindaco, who is here to represent the Strathclyde Centre for Environmental Law and Governance in Glasgow, has been a long supporter of island innovation. We really thank you, Professor Sindaco, for all of the efforts that you've put in to support our work over the last few years. You're conveniently located in Glasgow, so you have a busy year ahead of you. And I know the centre has a really interesting angle looking at things happening in the Scottish Islands and also islands around the world. So it's very great to have the Glaswegian perspective on this global discussion. And we'll just hand over to you for some remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, James. This is the third time that I participate to the Virtual Island Summit. I remember when it was pre-COVID, and it actually worked tremendously well as a virtual environment, and it continues doing so. So my warmest congratulations to not just James, but the wider team at Island Innovation and all the partners. What I want to do in the next few minutes, and then I'm happy obviously to answer any questions, is explain not just why I am involved in the Virtual Island Summit, but why academia, why researchers should be involved even more, I think, in the future in the Virtual Island Summit and in island studies, generally speaking. And then I'll very briefly say something about how academics are involved in island collaborations, and not just because James mentioned, but obviously I am in Glasgow and following COP26 very closely. I'll finish with some remarks about COP26 from a more Scottish perspective. But first of all, why are academics involved in the Virtual Island Summit and more generally speaking in island work? Well, I believe that what we can provide is critical and independent review, but not just to projects where you only have academics. Let's be honest, that's quite boring, at least in my opinion, and not very impactful. So a project where you have academics, government, industry, civil society, community, nonprofits, that's where the academics play a role in providing that critical and independent review. Now, to give you one example, one where we are collaborating with Island Innovation, we are collaborating with the University of the Aegean in doing precisely that and bringing the voice of the community in a Volkswagen and Greek government e-mobility project on Astipalea in Greece. So that's the kind of things academics can do. Provide critical and independent review to projects that have other stakeholders, not just academics. But then academia, universities have another really important role, which is a convening role. We do have a convening power, which can bring island stories and good practices together. And again, to give you one example, we have been working with Island Innovation for quite some time now along these lines. We first developed a survey when COVID just started, and we have a report on that and a policy brief as well. But then we moved forward, and together with another academic partner, the University of Prince Edward Island, the Institute of Island Studies at that university, we developed, together with Island Innovation, the COVID-19 Island Insights, which reviewed how the pandemic fared in 23 islands all around the world. We are now mining that data, and we're going to be focusing on specifically tourism, governance, food security, and climate change and energy, trying to stem some good practices that are relevant, again, not for academics, but for policymakers and wider island-related stakeholders. And this specific example of convening power leading to a policy-relevant but academic input product will be presented at COP26 in Glasgow. So let me finish with a few words about COP26 in Glasgow. And what does this mean from a Scottish perspective? In my opinion, I think for the Scottish Islands, COP26 is a unique forum to share success stories with other island policymakers and stakeholders. There are plenty of them to share. The renewable energy story from the Orkney Islands, for example, but there are many more. And it will be important to have that conversation and share those good practices, and for Scottish Islands themselves, receive lessons from good practices elsewhere. But there's also a wider issue here, and it's about providing input and considering the role of subnational states as Scotland as a whole, but also the role in processes like the Paris Agreement implementation of subnational island jurisdictions, as many Scottish islands are, in the implementation of the international climate change regime. And just to finish up, let me remind you that Scotland has a story to tell. Scotland has passed an Island Scotland Act in 2018, one of the few countries with, if you want, the mainland and islands to have a ad hoc, specifically focused piece of legislation on islands. It passed It adopted the first ever national islands plan that stems from the Island Scotland Act in 2019, and just very recently has started to develop the carbon neutral islands project just here in 2021. So I leave it to that, James, and I'm happy to take any questions if needed.
Many thanks, Francesco, for that. And we are very happy to be collaborating with the Centre on a number of projects, particularly in the lead up to COP26. Island Innovation will be hosting a virtual islands space with the idea that this year particularly, but also in general, many island communities, island representatives from around the world will just not have the opportunity to be there physically in Glasgow. And so we want to be that point of connection between everything happening at the COP and islanders around the world to know that really rely on the COP to take action for them. And so there'll be more coming out soon about COP26 and the work that we're doing for that. Do keep an eye on your inboxes over the next few weeks to learn more. And we're looking forward to having a number of partners for that work at the COP, and particularly how islands in the UK and Scotland that maybe do not have a direct seat at the table can benefit from these conversations and with connections with islands all over the world. Before we go to questions, one other initiative that Island Innovation is launching during this virtual island summit is the Island Innovation Awards that were mentioned earlier by Ambassador Webson. And we're very proud to be partnering with the Clinton Global Initiative to launch these awards, which will we'll have 12 different categories for individuals, projects, and organizations having impact in various fields on islands. We'll be talking about these more in the opening ceremony, which is coming later today. But I'd like to play now a video by President Bill Clinton to introduce these awards.
Is part of its mission to help island communities create sustainable, resilient futures. The Clinton Global Initiative Action Network on Post-Disaster Recovery is proud to partner on the inaugural Island Innovation Awards, which will recognize individuals and organizations creating positive change for island communities around the world. Like CGI, Island Innovation helps drive sustainable development across island communities by sharing innovative projects and best practices. And as a longtime member of the CDI Action Network community, Island Innovation knows the value of building partnerships across government, the private sector, and community groups to make real lasting change. Around the world, the millions of people who live on islands are on the front lines of some of the great challenges of our time, especially as it relates to climate change and the increasingly extreme natural disasters. The goal of Island Innovation Awards is to elevate the voices, the work, and the ideas of talented individuals and organizations who are pioneering solutions to these challenges in their island communities so that the rest of the world can learn from them and replicate their projects. Individuals living across island communities will have the opportunity to apply for themselves or can nominate other individuals, governments, NGOs, or communities. There are 12 categories, including Future Island Leader, Women in Leadership, Sustainable Company of the Year, and COVID-19 Response Awards, just to name a few. I hope that you'll consider either applying yourself or nominating someone doing impactful work in your community. And I look forward to seeing the efforts of this year's nominees and winners. Thanks and good luck.
And we're very thankful for the Clinton Global Initiative and the Clinton Foundation for their partnership on this new program. And the awards will be announced in December of this year after the COP26 and are open to all islands around the world, including small island states, but also islands that are part of other countries, including the Scottish Isles. I'd like to invite our three remaining speakers up onto the screen again. And while you're doing that, I'm hoping that we have a question here from Emma Lewis in Jamaica from the Petrie blog. Emma, I'm going to allow you to talk and hopefully you'll be able to go ahead and pose a question to our speakers.
Hi, good morning from me here in Jamaica, Kingston, Jamaica. I write a blog and I write quite a bit on climate change and the environment. Petchary, Petchary. So please look me up. Anyway, my sort of burning question is, Barbuda was mentioned. Some other islands in the Caribbean are struggling, obviously, with COVID-19 and also with the impact on tourism. And I wondered if any of the speakers had any thoughts on our highly dependent islands that are very dependent on tourism, and how we can handle that with the impact of climate change and the impact on our environment. Recently, here in Jamaica, mangroves were cut down to build a large hotel, and this is probably replicated in other islands as well, I believe. So I wondered if you had any thoughts about how to balance that huge dependency on tourism with our climate change issues. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Emma, for posing that question. Clearly a big issue for islands, especially the Caribbean, but other islands around the world. I'm not sure if a member of the panel wants to jump in. Okay, Catherine, over to you.
Yeah, I'll take a crack at it, although of course that's an extremely difficult question. But I'll do my best, Emma. Thank you for asking it. I think that you've hit this issue spot on, in the sense that many island nations are highly dependent on tourism, and will continue to be dependent on it. And at the same time, while tourism can be or is an important part of the economy, it also can be highly destructive. And so we have to think about, how do we design systems so that you have an effective system of tourism that doesn't lead to complete destruction of the resources that you depend upon for that industry and other industries. There's, I think, a few issues that, well, a lot of issues around this that to kind of poke at. One is, it's essential to have management systems that regulate the tourism industry in a way that's effective. So environmental impact assessments before building, enforcement of requirements as it relates to development or utilization of resources. Also, I think that in an area, in thinking about sustainable finance, I think a lot of nations, and island nations in particular, face challenges with paying the cost of managing the system. So tourism and tourists are utilizing these resources, but aren't paying the full cost of the impact that they cause. And so in that sense, it's important to design systems to allow for capture of rent from those tourists. So for example, Palau is probably one of the great examples out there of requiring a tax for anybody entering the company. There's a fee to enter the country. There's a fee to enter the country, and that fee helps pay for the management of the resources. You also have to sign a pledge when you enter Palau that you're going to take care of that resource. So that's another way to do it. Other examples of paying for the cost of tourism include things like dive tags, or other types of user fees to access a resource. So that's one piece, I think, of the issue. The other is to think and consider how to restrict access. I think a lot of tourists are looking for an experience that also is one that supports nature and the environment and communities. And as we sort of turn towards that, I think that we have an opportunity to shift the way that tourism operates. So I feel like it's, there's a lot of important steps that we need to take in this sector, and there's some good opportunities in terms of how to manage it, but it's going to continue to be an enormous challenge for a lot of islands.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Francesco, do you have any comments to add?
Just very briefly to add to that, two key points, some of which have been aptly mentioned already by Catherine. The first one is that if we are serious about the climate emergency and if we're serious about net zero and so forth, we do need to think changes in the tourism sector per se. But I do think that the only way for this to be sustainable, and I don't put sustainable in a green way, but sustainable in the long term, is if you actually have the input, not just of the island communities, which is incredibly important, but also of the big players. So you do need the private sector as well to be part of that conversation. It's easier said than done in some island settings. And obviously every island setting will be to some extent different. And the second thing, I'm not saying it's all about economic diversification, but actually it is in a way. So it's really about taking a step back, and nobody liked COVID and brought so much disruption to everybody, but it has given us some time to think. How do we diversify? I know Island Innovation has been very much involved in discussions about digital nomads, about people who now realize they can work remotely as long as there's good digital connectivity and so forth. And so the options are there. You just need to start a conversation around it.
Absolutely. Thank you for that great answer to that question, something that we'll be digging into a lot this week as well. I've just received a note to say that we are now live on Shore TV in St. Helena. So hello to everyone joining in St. Helena, and thank you to Shore for streaming our sessions this week on TV in St. Helena. Just wanted to make that comment also. We have time for maybe one or two more questions. And I know Francisca Elma is here from the Sargassum podcast. I guess there'll be a Sargassum related question. So maybe back to you again, Catherine, on that one. But Francisca, would you like to pose a question?
Yes, please. My question is Sargassum related. And at our podcast, we always like to ask our guests and other people as well how they see sargassum, because a lot of people see it as a problem and then other people see it as an opportunity. So I wanted to ask the speakers, especially Catherine, because I'm sure she has come in contact with sargassum in her work. I don't know if the others have, how she sees sargassum, if it's more of an opportunity or more of a problem.
Yeah, I can start with an answer for that one as well. Well, I think in part it depends on which sargassum you're talking about and where. So of course, there's sargassum that makes up the Sargasso Sea is crucially important for biodiversity, and it provides immense habitat for ocean, for the animals and creatures that live in the ocean. However, of course, the sargassum problem in the Caribbean is an enormous one. I also think, to your point, it could be an opportunity, and there are efforts underway to think about how to utilize the sargassum. So for those of you who may not be super familiar with it, there is an annual ongoing bloom of sargassum in the Caribbean that washes up on shores. It's choking the life out of many nearshore organisms. It forms these enormously dense mats that then rot on the shore, creating anoxic conditions. And is, if you're living there, it's very problematic as well because of the aerosols that come off of it. And it's enormously smelly. So island nations have to think about how to deal with this. One is removing it, but then it's this enormous amount of biomass, and the question is, how can you utilize that in a way that is beneficial? So I've heard some discussions and some interests in developing biofuel from sargassum, and there's, I think, some efforts to do that. People are in some places considering it for fertilizer, and I'm sure you have a better sense of that than I do in terms of the potential for that. But so I think both, right? It is an enormous problem, but there also could be an opportunity to utilize it in a way that is ultimately beneficial. Thanks.
That was quite a specific question, so I'm not sure if the panelists have any comments addressing that, or any of the other questions that have come up. I can see we maybe have time for one more question. Alan Berland in Bermuda has raised his hand. So Alan, if you'd like to go ahead and pose your question.
Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can. Go ahead, Alan.
Yeah, I just wanted to layer in about tourism and the environment. And I think there's some really great opportunities to showcase some of the things that have been done. And Bermuda had turtle conservation in the 1600s. I think it was one of the first environmental acts on the planet. But you know, that's something to celebrate. The other thing that Bermuda has done really well is collecting rainwater from our roofs and putting them in cisterns. And that's what every residence in Bermuda does. So I think, and I've just heard some questions on the sargassum. We can run easily tours out on vessels like Spirit of Bermuda to see the sargassum and to see the rich life that is there, and the little young turtles and the seahorses, and it is a critical ecosystem in the Atlantic. And you know, I think there are ways, and I appreciate that in the Caribbean it has other issues, but it's actually a rich fertilizer too, so it just needs to be harvested properly. Turtles really need it. In Bermuda, the turtle grass has been depleted, and I've suggested that we go and lasso sargassum and bring that to Bermuda to you know, feed our turtles. But so I think there's some really rich opportunities to showcase in a good, authentic way ways that we can help the planet, be it harvesting rainwater, you know, be it obviously doing, you know, things on renewables and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And Catherine, I know you do a lot of work in Bermuda, so maybe just back to you for a quick comment on that. Thank you, Alan.
Yeah, well, I just add a small comment to say that you know, there is an enormous difference between the Sargasso Sea, and the importance of that Sargasso Sea. And my understanding is that the sargassum in the Caribbean is being driven from, you know, is coming up from the south, and is, you know, I guess there's still a lot of work being done to understand why it's exploding in the Caribbean. So clearly, it's an example of an ecosystem or that is not in balance, and right, we have to harvest it or address it in a way that is, I think, beneficial to the environment and potentially beneficial to people, but not in a way that will cause the destruction because of the importance of it as a habitat as well.
Thank you very much. I think we'll move away from sargassum for the last few minutes, but appreciate that's a very big issue for some parts of the Caribbean. A quick question for you, Alexi, about energy specifically, and this is quite broad, so we'll talk in fairly broad terms. Clearly, renewables is a big opportunity for island nations, and that is an environmental opportunity, but it's also an opportunity for energy independence. And this question is about which of those renewables pose the biggest opportunity. And so clearly that varies a lot from island to island. And I'd just be curious if you have any comments about that. I mean, how do islands identify which of the many different renewable options can work for them?
Okay, this is clearly something we can do. The easiest way for the island is to contact us, and for every island we'll make a study and decide if there is a potential for wind energy, or if there is a potential for solar. The easiest way is obviously to develop solar. This is the quickest solution, because if you want to develop wind energy, you need to have at least 12 months data. So it's a longest way, but it's still possible. But it's quite hard to develop wind energy in for example, in the Pacific area because of the storm. That's the reason why we normally develop solar. And for sure, if you want to maximize your renewable energy mix, you will need battery storage. So we need to combine solar and battery storage.
Thank you very much for that. Appreciate it. One final question for Francesco, and you already addressed some of this in your talk about the role of islands at the COP26, and so really there's a question here about how islands can have their voices heard at the COP, and what is the plan for islands to really be represented at the COP. And there's many different ways I'm sure that you could address that. But just from initiatives and programs that you are aware of, maybe you have some comments on that to wrap up.
Yeah, at all Conference of the Parties, there will be coalitions, let's say, of like-minded countries, like-minded stakeholders. So here we had the ambassador from AOSIS, for example. So clearly they will be a huge player when it comes to COP26. And they would have been also for the CBD COP, which is now not taking place anymore. In terms of what, will there be an island pavilion? Will there not? Will there be a showcase of islands like happened, for example, at the COP that was organized by Fiji? It's still work in progress, to be honest. I think COP26 will be still work in progress until the day before, to be honest. I am aware, but I hope I don't mind, James. You don't mind, James, if I give you the floor to some extent, because I'm aware that island innovation itself, even if from a virtual perspective, is thinking of bringing the voice of all islands together. From my side, I mean, I am involved in a specific project, but that's related to youth and island-based children in primary schools, and the Strathclyde Centre for Environmental Law and Governance, together with some partners, has developed a project called Climate Change Message in a Bottle, which will bring their voice to COP26. And feel free to reach out to me if you want more information about that. But I hope, James, you don't mind if I give you the floor about that.
Thank you. That's maybe a nice way to wrap up in the final minute. So I appreciate that. As I mentioned before, we are really interested to do this, and it's worth pointing out that obviously we had AOSIS, the Alliance of Small Island States here. Small island states have a seat at the table in the conversation, and they represent a very important block in the discussions. But there are many islands around the world that do not necessarily have any direct voice. I mean, for example, we have Hawaii or Puerto Rico that are represented by the United States that maybe has slightly different interest in the islands themselves. We have the UK or French overseas territories that again have slightly different interests or very different interests than the countries representing them. And so what we're really interested in doing is to help give a voice and give that opportunity to participate in the COP for all islands who are impacted by climate change, beyond and in addition to the very important voice of the small island states. And so please do, if you're interested in that, reach out to us, and there'll be more information coming out over the coming weeks about that. And I think the next few months will be very interesting to see how COP has an impact on the climate conversation, especially given that last year's COP was cancelled due to COVID, and that over the last 18 months we've seen obviously been very distracted by the importance of dealing with the pandemic, which has taken away from some of these climate conversations, which we really need to get back on track again. So with that, I will end this press conference. Thank you to Catherine, Alexei, Francesco for answering those questions, and for Ambassador Webson for delivering the opening note from the Alliance of Small Island States. In 1 hour, we will have, you can hear the church bells behind me. In 1 hour, we will have the grand opening plenary with more speakers joining us. So we'll encourage you to join again in 1 hour. And thank you again, everyone. Have a wonderful day.